I'm glad you could join us here at Preaching by Heart. Several years ago, Reverend Dr. Mellon Kennedy and I created this program. We've shared it with clergy around the country. We have found that there's an increasing interest and demand for this kind of speaking, recapturing the ancient art of speaking without notes or manuscript. There are many ways of being an effective speaker. This is one which has been neglected and which we share with you. What we share here is an excerpt from a program co-sponsored by Harvard Divinity School for its students, for community leaders, and for a group of interfaith clergy. I begin this portion by sharing a resource from 1826, a book that was written back then, whose technique is particularly relevant and might, I hope, help you take your next steps toward practicing this art. Give you some hints on how to do it in your way so that you can speak your message from your heart and from your mind in a way that will be most useful for those you would like to reach. The more that I've looked at all the new literature that's come out, and it's only been 10 years, folks, that this has been rediscovered. There were not many books, between 1965 and 2010 that addressed preaching, speaking without text or manuscript. So, the more I read all of that stuff, and it's on your bibliography, and we don't have time today, but take a look at the bibliography. There's some real good things in it. Joseph Ware was the one that kind of broke the ice. Joseph Webb. That's a good book. That's a nice one. Anyway, this is what Henry Ware was saying in 1826. How to do it is you just have to be saturated in whatever the subject is. You've just got to immerse yourself, and if you've got life experience in that subject, and you've been working with it for a long time, no matter what the field is, you have a certain authority, and all you have to do is figure out. Then another piece of this puzzle is to get a picture of the whole thing that you're going to say. So in your packet, there's a little mind mapping that I do. I take stickies and write on them, and I move them around, and so then once I have the whole picture, which usually I hope it's done by Thursday, because if I have the whole picture, then I can move those stickies, this point, this reference, that point. I can move them around, and I do. And then there's a pile of stickies that gets thrown out. But if I have that outline, so it's a total picture, and then if it's organized logically, your logic, not my logic, your logic, does it all fit together? It seems really simple, but it's if you're writing something, you have to do a similar exercise. But you have to even play with the pieces more and more if you're going to, for me, it's playing with them means talking to the subject endlessly. So once I have that outline done, I know the subject, I know the resources I'm using to study, then I have the real task of putting it in some kind of an order and talking to myself about it. It's just practicing. Practice can mean two things. What you can do at rehearsal, get up and talk, which I often do. I talk to myself all the time. Sometimes I get bored, and other times I say, wow, that really worked. When I was in Haverhill, those years when I started doing this every week, I would get to the sanctuary an hour or two before, at least an hour before anybody else was going to arrive. So that was pretty early. And then I would give it 3 times in the sanctuary. And then there were things that would happen as I did that were cues. to what the next thing was that was going to happen. But it's just this practicing until it just flows. You know, for now, it doesn't take that much practice as it used to, because I get more confident of where I'm going, and I get there quicker. You know, you just walk down the same path for a while, and you're bound to get, to know where you're going. But, and one of the other things is that in doing his method is that it frees up time to study. You know, you're not crafting the words. If I want to craft the words, I'll write something to get it published or share it with a friend. Or if you want to buy my books, they're back there. So, I mean, the writing has its place, but it's not always in this mode the essential thing. And taking that big hunk out frees you for a lot of time to go study the next thing that comes to your mind. Yeah.
How do you put your sermons on the web?
That's another story. I'll get to that. Ooh, that's a good question. If you can hold that, Julie. that's a really good question. and then it's starting small. I used the example in my sermon about having these little note cards. All I had was a minute, 2-3 minutes segues to learn. I can learn that, but it was a little piece. And as a result of taking that little piece, then I got the idea. I really got the idea that putting those little pieces together goes quickly. You could. Language is simply words are going to come. Preach on something that's of interest. If it's of interest to you, go for it. Don't preach on somebody else's sermon. That's just, we learn that in all preaching classes. And the fearlessness and the confidence, and again, I put the starting small because I think that's really important. That's a real important piece, that you just, whatever you're doing, in whatever setting, there's some little piece of it you can do it without having to look at notes. You might want to have them over there for the other part of it, but it's just that little piece. That will be good. So that's a start on method. We'll get into more, and I will get back to your question later at the end, because it's a real good one.
Okie doke. Share a few ideas with you. As I've been thinking about preaching or speaking without a text, I've been making the distinction between the preparation and the delivery, and possibly seeing a continuum of possible approaches in terms of the preparation and also in terms of the delivery. And I really want to underscore this. When I was trained in seminary, what I learned to do was to run a highly polished text and to read it as engagingly as possible, which I think is a completely legitimate way of reaching people. And I hope that I reached a level of comfort and ability and skill in that approach. What I realized is there are other ways to do it. And so I started exploring not just the preparation but the delivery. And actually this came up in one of the small groups that I was visiting. Somebody mentioned this distinction. So what I began to realize is what I can do, I can write, the first time I preached extemporaneously, I had a highly polished text. It was at the Washington Church. My subject was universalism. The Universalists were extemporaneous preachers. So I just stepped out from behind the pulpit, left the text behind, although I had it, and I just gave it. So what Steve and I are inviting you to do is find your authentic way, whatever that is. If for you, speaking and preaching is really to write that Holly Polish text and to deliver it from the text with as much presence and heart and enthusiasm, do it, and do it well. If that's really who you are, claim it. I just want to invite you to explore the continuum and see what really fits for you. I've probably tried all different places on the continuum, as far as doing a rough draft, and then delivering it, or doing just an outline, and then having the outline with me in the pulpit and kind of speaking from my outline. What Stephen was just talking about the saturation. Just really immersing oneself in that topic, whatever it is. And for those of you who have the wonderful task and call to do social justice work out in the community, you know restorative justice. You know what's going on in prisons. You know that stuff. You are living it, you're saturating, you're doing it. Because you're focused right on that as your calling and your work in life. So that saturation and living that, and then trusting that you can get up and speak from that place of saturation in that. I left this a little blank because there is something else, and I don't know what to call it. Just asking for guidance, praying, and getting up and speaking from what you feel the Spirit is calling you to say in that moment. And there are many people in many traditions who speak and preach from that place. They just trust that their thinking mind cannot ascertain what needs to be addressed in this moment, but their heart can. And by clearing and being prayerful and letting the message that's needed for these people at this time, letting it come through. There are many ministers and lay leaders and social justice folk who speak from that place. Personally, I've tried probably all kinds of combos from this. And mostly what I do now, I almost always write some kind of outline, and then I just speak. And I live with it. Once in a while, I will do some other variation, but that's I'm sort of landing somewhere in there as I find my own comfort. And in terms of techniques for preparation, I like to use props. And sometimes your props can be your outline. If you have 3 points and 3 props there on the table or the altar, you have a visual outline. If you get lost, you just look, oh yes, the plant I was going to talk about at the authenticity. There's my visual outline. And people in your audience or your congregation, if you have people who are really visual learners, they're going to follow you better with your props than with words. So personally, I find that very helpful. I also do a lot of memorizing of poems and prayers and quotes. That's a spiritual practice for me, and that's one that Stephen and I share. We both, turns out, do that. And then sometimes with no planning, some piece of a prayer or poem will just find its way into what I'm speaking because it lives in me. Because it's an important enough piece, a prayer or a poem that is so important that I've cared enough to memorize it, then it just is there when I need it. Also, a few other thoughts in terms of preparation. I really suggest practicing out loud. I mean, I do a lot of saturation of thinking and talking to myself, but it's very different. Talk to the wall, talk to the mirror. because it's going to sound different when you say it than it will inside of yourself. So we are in modern culture rediscovering oral culture. It's a different way of being. Most of us grew up in literary culture, in written culture. And so learning the skills and the ways of oral culture is a discovery for most of us. I mean, did you grow up in a community where you were sitting at the knee of somebody who was telling you stories and you were absorbing them, and storytelling was a part of what you grew up with? Probably not. Most of us didn't have that advantage. So we're trying to learn oral culture.
If I may, I think that part of preparation is it's a life activity.
A life activity, yes.
Meaning that it is cumulative, and as you give sermons or as people give talks, relay things that are important to them, it does build over time, and it's not just coming in completely, fresh on something.
I just want to say 2 quick points on delivery. For myself, before I do a sermon or a talk, I almost always say a prayer. And as I mentioned, I am a Sufi, and this is a prayer that I was taught in the Sufi tradition, to look around and to say this prayer. These are my beloved friends. We are united in love. Love wills that I give this talk. And that helps me get out of often when I'm putting on my stole. So that's a delivery practice that I have. Pausing in terms of delivery, we've already mentioned that. Giving time for you to see and feel the people that you're with. And also something that I learned in my Sufi training, if there's somebody who's sitting there hating every word you say, what do? Ignore them. It's very important. Otherwise, it will throw you off. If you keep looking back to them, they're frowning, and then you get yourself more anxious. Ignore them.
So you ignore Ken?
Yeah.
Keep waving, she never looks at you.
Especially as you're beginning. Make the eye contact with the people where you feel that energy and that rapport, and that will help you. So that you don't throw yourself off. And something also that, know your exit, know your landing.
Know where the exit door is.
Yes, so that, have that landing place for yourself. So that as you are going along, you know where you're gonna finish it. So those are our thoughts on method and techniques. And as I said at the beginning, for me, it's really not even about method or technique. It's about getting my ego out of the way and having a spiritual practice that I stay centered and open. So
what do you
how
think?
about what are your thoughts?
That's powerful. I never thought about the pausing aspect of it. And that's really right. I always thought as soon as you go on the pulpit, bang, but I can see the power of just pausing and centering yourself and connecting with
I have heard the Dalai Lama speak. He comes out, and for the first, I don't know how many minutes, he's just looking and smiling at the 10,000 people that are there. He's just creating a presence and an energy without words. It's very powerful. So, other thoughts?
The practicing a lot, you say, that you're practicing in the mirror. When you speak, I can see how important it is for you to look at people. You are connecting each person, and that was really important. So when you're practicing, how do you practice that? It's only you in the mirror or the wall.
I guess I don't know. I never thought about it.
My experience, I mean, not that preachers preach in front of mirrors as practice. I mean, nobody ever does that.
Nobody what?
Nobody ever does that, preaches to yourself in a mirror, right? Nobody ever. Come on. That's a joke. For at least people who...
I got it.
So, anyway, I do from time to time. I'll stand in front of the mirror. And then, but what I find is if I know it, if it's flowing, I can look at myself. If don't have it, if it's not flowing, I'm looking elsewhere. But if I know it so well, then I'm really not looking at myself. I mean, in a sense, I'm really, I'm making assessments. Is he doing this too much? Is he what? But if I really know it, I don't find like I target it. Anyway, for me, practice is not just getting in front of a mirror or in the sanctuary before everybody shows up, but it's driving the car. I don't understand how I ever thought point A fit with point B. Now, where did that ever come from? So I just talk about it. I said, well, there's something in here. Let me tell myself the story again, or Jacob, or whatever. Let me tell you the story again. And when I tell my story again, then, lo and behold, either that fits or it doesn't fit. And if it doesn't fit, that's back to Henry Ware, it's not in your logic. Take it out. Or put it in the pile until you got it all together. Because it's that talking, for me, it's just that's the distillation. I mean, now I can just talk to myself about, once I have the outline, I can just talk to myself. I don't do the practice as much. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but it depends on whatever circumstance. But it's with you until you give the darn thing. That's the point. It's with you until you give it, and then it's done. We'll pick up at the end, at the very end, that question. But it's with you until it's done, and that's what you have to live with. So it's a different kind of anxiety. It doesn't go away. You can't just put it down and say, I'm done with my sermon. Because I'll be talking to myself. And I find going to bed and waking up are the best times. Particularly the waking up. My mind is blank. Or nearly blank. And in that time I can just wrestle with these questions. I can recite the outline. I can see the sticky of red here and the blue there, and but that's it's always there. It's a different process. It's no less study, it's no less discipline than writing something, but it's a different methodology. Yeah.
It almost sounds as if you're talking about, so this is what I'm trying to clarify. It almost sounds as if you're talking about doing the highly polished script, but bringing it in, as opposed to, and I realized there were two different titles up there, Speaking Without a Script, Preaching from the Heart.
Preaching from the heart,
And
yeah.
so I guess
We're
pressing a little
confused.
on- It sounds like you're talking about preaching without a document, as opposed to preaching from the heart, and I just want to press it.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think I hear
Is
you.
internal rather than,
I think I hear you.
okay.
Mine is always trying to find the heart. I mean, my conversations about text A, text B, point A and C or whatever, are always about trying to find what does it mean, and sometimes it's intellectual. If that doesn't fit, it doesn't fit intellectually, it doesn't fit, But the overall exercise is to find out what I want to say, what I feel about this, or not that I resolve it, but that I'm struggling with it. And if I'm struggling with it, that's what you share. I couldn't figure this out this week, folks. So here's my struggle.
The practice sounds to me like rehearsing.
Well,
Is that
it is and it isn't.
actor learning the script as opposed to,
Well, some people say, and on the bibliography, if you find folks who say, write the whole thing out and memorize it. I don't have that time. I mean, it may be good for some people, and it may be good for you. It may be the best way to do it. So it's not, but it is rehearsal. But it's rehearsal at two different levels, maybe. It's rehearsal at the level of, I'm trying to figure out what I want to say. And it's also rehearsing it at the level of how I'm going to say it. So if I say something to myself, I've got it all figured out here at this level, and I say it, it's not clear. When I did do the practice every week, I would find the first one was 23 minutes, the next one was 22 minutes, and the next one was 18. Well, some things dropped out. And those are good that they dropped out.